Before we start this morning, have we got any apologies?
Confirmed, Chairman. 7 members present, and we have apologies from Councillor David Stitt.
Thank you. Declarations of interest? Councillor Ferguson?
Yeah, item 4, Chair, the pension fund, I'll upset myself because I receive remuneration from it.
Thank you. Before we move on, Mr. Reevy, could I ask if you could maybe just introduce your team to the members that are present today?
Got it. Sorry. On my right is Tony Levison, who has responsibility for, as manager for what I call the main audit, the audit of your financial statements and everything that goes with that. And to her right again is Rachel Northwood. Rachel is a pension specialist, and because obviously similar to what you're talking about, we have the pension fund here today, and I didn't feel overconfident in answering any of your questions without Rachel with me. So Rachel's here in that capacity. Thank you.
Thank you. Just before we move on, can I just remind everybody that's present today that the meeting's going to be recorded, and that recording will subsequently be available for public listening. I believe we've had a request, members, from the auditors to take the pension paper first. Is everybody happy with that? Okay. Thank you very much, Councillor Ferguson. Thank you. Would you like to take us through the paper that's in front of us?
Certainly.
And if there's anything else that you would like to add to the information that we've already got, that would be helpful.
Thank you very much. So I'm working my way through this, the pension fund paper. So yeah, as Cameron said, I lead the audit of the pension fund for the council. We completed the audit a couple of weeks ago, and I'm pleased to say that the audit report will be a clean audit report, so there's no modifications or qualifications, which means that the truth and fairness of the accounts is as it should be, and there's no errors or misstatements that should have been made that were above our materiality levels. So that's all good news. On page 3, then, it talks you through the way we do the audit, and we refer back to our audit plan, and we say here that there was no cause to vary the work that we did from the audit plan. The audit status has actually moved on from here. We are now complete, so we've received all the information that we need in order to complete the audit, and obviously all that now remains is to have the accounts signed. What I do need to ask is whether or not there's been any subsequent events, perhaps in the last couple of months, that I should be aware of that might impact the pension fund? No.
Paul, would you like to answer that?
No material issues to mention, Chair.
Thank you very much. And the other thing to point out at the bottom of page 3 is that our independence has remained intact, no matters of any independence that need to be brought to your attention. On page 2, there's just a summary, some of the high-level figures that would appear in the main accounts. And just to comment here, the contribution rate were increased by 0.5% during the year, and all the movements that we've seen in the figures are all as expected, nothing untoward, nothing unexpected. So that was also good news. And all the analytical review that we do and so on all pointed towards everything being as it should be. No matters to note in our audit of contributions at the bottom of page 4. So no control points, no sort of housekeeping points, nothing like that to have to mention. In terms of the benefit payments on page 5, again, movements are really just in line with the changing profile, if you like, of the pensioner population, all in line with our expectations and the annual pension increase as we would have expected, and the overall increase of 216 pensioners during the year. And On the last point on page 5, in terms of fraud, this is obviously something that we do like to keep an eye on with the pension schemes. And I don't know if you're aware of these organisations called liberation funds, but we do like to just warn all the members of the, are in responsibility for pension schemes that members may be approached by these liberation funds offering to give them some lump sum payment out of their pension at an early date. A lot of them have turned out to be bad news. I think there's been a lot of arrests, which you'll have seen in the press about these things. And it's just something to be aware of. I don't know if anyone's been approached by any of these. It's wrong to say that they're not bona fide. I mean, they're not illegal, but they're not always good news. So we'd tend to try and steer away from them.
Mr. Haswell, do you want to make a comment on that? No.
Just confirming, I was approached by one of these companies.
Yeah. I mean, they can be good for some people who need to get some cash out of their pension scheme, but generally they're not good news. You're generally better off where you are, I think is the general industry suggestion. But we're not aware of anything like that that's really gone on, so that's fine.
Councillor McKee, did you wish to ask a question on that?
No, just to comment on that actually, I'm already a pensioner and I got that from my pension fund, but the good thing was they told me I've got another 15 years to live, so...
Did you get that?
Folks,
In writing, then you're all right. Over on page 6, we talk here about all the investments, obviously the largest number by far in the accounts. We audit the investments by way of receiving third-party confirmations from all of the investment managers. We then take that a step further, and to get further comfort over these balances, the valuation, we do our own price testing. So all of the investments that are listed securities, so equity, and confirm those against the third-party confirmation that we've had. And then in the funds, these pooled investment vehicles, we look at recently traded units to make sure that the prices that have been transacted around the year end are indeed similar or the same as that's been confirmed in the third-party confirmations. And happy to say that there were no material differences there. So the value, the market value of the investments that appear in the accounts has all been corroborated by third parties, and like I say, by the additional testing that we've done. At the bottom of page 7, there are controls reports. I don't know if as a committee receive those controls reports. They're long reading. You'll note that some of them do have exceptions. Unless they have an audit impact, we wouldn't propose to sort of bring those to your attention, because usually they're minor sort of housekeeping points, and as long as the control report itself hasn't been qualified by the reporting accountant, that doesn't tend to give us cause for concern. Page 8 just confirms that there were no significant risks that were noted in the pension scheme. And on page 9, no new matters to report in terms of control recommendations, and just an update on the prior year, which, to be honest, in all the pension schemes I see, all the pension funds, it's a common issue where the financial systems aren't always exactly in line time-wise with the administration systems, and so you do end up with differences in numbers of members. What I would say that it is something to keep an eye on, and if you can explain what the differences relate to, then that's fine. We as audited would be happy with that. It doesn't have an impact on the accounts themselves, because the way the differences are, they're the right way round. You're not paying people that aren't on the membership. It tends to be that membership, there may be people who have 2 membership records, and therefore they're appearing twice on one system and only one on another. But there was nothing there to suggest that any of the numbers in the accounts would be wrong. But like I say, just a point to keep an eye on. In the private sector, all the pension schemes have had to comply with the pension regulator requirements in this area to do what's called data cleanse, to make sure that all the records are as accurate and up to date as they can possibly be. That might be something that you might want to consider for the pension fund going forward. If that was something that you were interested in, we could kind of help in terms of suggesting ways to do that. But like I say, there's no real area for concern as long as these numbers don't get any bigger in terms of differences.
Sorry, I was going to take questions at the end, but do you want to ask questions as we're going through? All right, okay, no, sorry. Councillor Prentice, are you sure? Because we can just, if you want to. Okay. Please.
What you are saying, there's no chance of us paying pensioners twice.
No. I would be worried if there were more people on the what we call the pensioner payroll, so physically getting a payment each month, than are on the membership listings. Then that would be, to my mind, the wrong way round. But as it is, you've got more records than you have payments going out. So the chances are you've got people with duplicate records, which is the way round that I would prefer to see it. That was all that was in my report. I don't know if there's any questions or comments on the accounts themselves.
I would just like to say thank you for taking us through that report. It's particularly interesting to hear the way you've actually come to your decisions on the report. So I think for members in particular, they'll be pleased to have heard that this morning. I have a number of members who are looking to come in. So Councillor Witts, you're first.
Thank you, Chair. I'm looking at page 46, that is page 4 in the report. Commentary. This question might be more properly addressed to Mr. Garrett, I don't know. Just to give you the heads up before I say it. The main cause for the fall in total contributions has been the decrease in employer strain on the fund contributions. How did that come about?
Strain the fund payments are effectively payments in relation to the early release of pensions to officers. So when someone takes early retirement, they get access to their pension earlier than would normally have been the case, and there's a compensation payment made to the pension fund to reflect that. The reason for the significant drop between 2012 and 2013 is that we let a large number of officers go leading up to the 2011-12 year end, a lot of them at a senior level as well, so the strain in the fund payments were significant in that year. They were reduced in the year we've just finished because we didn't let as many people go, and also at a lower level.
Councillor Dryborough.
Thanks very much, Chair. I'm just going to come back to the exceptions at the bottom of page 7 or 49 and 58, and although there is one with no exceptions, there are every other between 6 or 3 and 7. Now, although you're saying they're a minor sort of detail, it tends to be an awful lot if you add them all together. Is it the same sort of exceptions within each of the funds, or?
Most of the exceptions, well, if I go back a step, the way the reporting accountants test these controls is with very large sample sizes. For example, 60, they would test a sample of 60 of these controls. And even if there's one exception in that 60, it will come up as an exception. And I don't have the detail of these to hand, but from recollection, it will be that 1 out of 60, a particular control, which is evidenced by 2 signatures, perhaps hadn't been there. And to us, like I say, that doesn't indicate a systemic failure at all. The other area that a lot of these exceptions can arise in is that of the internal controls around IT, and they will be around passwords. If people leave, their passwords aren't retracted quickly enough. And again, if there's one exception out of 60, it'll still be flagged as an exception. And if there was any indication that there was a failure of controls, the report would have been qualified, and that would have given us some concern. But again, even if the report is qualified, it may not have an audit impact. So that there's kind of lots of steps to go before it would cause us concern.
Do you want to come back?
Not so much on that question, but the other one was your internal control recommendations on page 9 with regard the difficulty in reconciling membership, and I don't know if it's maybe Paul that may be answering this. Is there anything ongoing within the council to try and reconcile that quicker?
Paul, do you want to answer that?
Thanks, yes. Yeah, this is something we're looking at the minute. As Rachel said, it was actually raised last year and we're working through that since. The key point, as Rachel said, is that there's not a concern that this difference is leading to additional payments, but obviously we do want to make sure that reconciliation is done. There's an issue with the access system, which I think is used by all funds in Scotland, apart from one, I think, that isn't producing the reports that allow us to do that reconciliation at the minute, but we're working through the details of that, because we'd like to see, the reason for the difference is X number of people with 2 records on the pension system, so we can actually work through and make sure that everything is correct. So we're working on that at the minute, but it's not yet resolved.
Yes.
Reading through the sort of commentary on this particular thing, it might be that some members have left the pension scheme and then come back in later on, and I don't know if they'll be getting a pension for that, or they've got a different employee number or something like that. So certainly we need to look at that. And there's also other areas where, for instance, in the schools where you've got people with 3 jobs that might have a different employee number for each of those 3 jobs. So we'd certainly look at that.
That's exactly the point. That there are certainly members with not multiple but more than one job, which does give rise to more than one record and only one payment. So.
You did mention the possibility of data cleansing and that might assist in this. Paul, can I ask if we've got any, are we considering doing the data cleanse?
I'd have to be honest, Chair, I'm not really sure how that would work, but I can certainly look for that information and come back to you.
Mr. Haswell?
Chairman, I've just spoken to an individual outside who has 2 pensions from the council, but gets one payment. The logical thing to do would be to tie the pension to the national insurance number. Now, I'm not sure how easy that would be to do. Rather than have an employee number, have an insurance number, because everyone's got a different national insurance number. Don't know how easy that would be to do. We've got an undertaking, I think, to the external auditor, and certainly the undertaking was given to the pension fund subcommittee, that this would be looked at and we would address the issue.
Thank you. I've got Councillor Wood and then Councillor McKee.
Thank you, Chair. I noticed that the audit is done to international standards in auditing. How often are these reviewed? And can you tell me how robust you feel your processes have been? And do you find, or do you believe there are any weaknesses that need to be considered in the future?
I think this is perhaps a question across the board. Our auditing standards are, in some cases, I think, probably more stringent than the international standards. I think that would be fair to say. Our standards are constantly being reviewed and improved upon. Every year we have updated requirements. So I would, in a short answer to your question, I don't have any concerns at all that there's anything that we're behind on. Cameron, if you want to.
As Rachel says, we all follow international standards in terms of actually what you, and you need to follow that as well. This is a core part of PwC's business, so as you would expect, we take this very, very seriously. Our quality and our standards have to be impeccable, and Rachel makes a good point that we probably go past the standards in terms of what we do just for ourselves, and one of the things, we have a very, very extensive training programme, mandatory training programme that we all have to go through. And what's very painful is we get tested on it as well, actually, and you have to score, what was the latest one, was it 80%, isn't it? You have to score 80% in the tests that we get, or you have to do it all again, and nobody wants to do it again, trust me. So it's very stringent, very stringent.
Do you want to come back, Councillor Wood?
If you don't mind, well, please don't take this as a criticism, but it's just, I'm kind of looking at how can you evidence to us as a committee that you are actually as good as you're stating at the present?
The way we seek to do that is through the audit plan that we bring to you at the beginning of the year, and to give you that opportunity to question us. One thing is always worth emphasising, I think, when we're talking to members or people equivalent, is that we work to materiality standards, and we shared that in the audit plan, so we don't work to the penny, because you just can't get that absolute assurance, actually. So that's the opportunity when, if you recall, the audit plan we brought, we set out, here's our approach, here's what we're going to do, and perhaps we could do for the main audit if it would be helpful. We weren't going to, Tony, but perhaps we could. We identified at that time some areas where we felt were higher risk, that we would do extra work. Now, we aren't going to talk about these, but we can, because it's mentioned in this report, we can maybe touch on some of these areas, just to let you know what we actually did do there. to get a conclusion in these areas, we can certainly do that. That's not a problem.
I think that would be very useful for the committee. Councillor McKee.
Thanks, Chair. It's this people leaving and coming back, and the question of added years. Now, on the assumption that they come back at the same or a higher level, if their pensions are no linked, they could be losing out. But if they come back at a lower level, it might be to their benefit to keep them separate. As you know, if somebody's left after 15 years and they come back, then they do another 10 years, that would be 25 in total. But it may be that the 10 years are at a lower wage rate, so the last 3 years may be less than the final 3 in the first pension. So, I don't see why, when you're recruiting, that the form doesn't show that they've been there before and when they left, and they come back, and all these things should be linked automatically, I would have thought.
Paul, would you like to answer that question?
You're as confused as me.
Blame HR, everybody else does.
Mr. Reevy, would you like to?
There is a relevant thing here, actually, and you, as members, you'll probably be well cited on that. That certain people had some concerns that what would happen, that people would perhaps work in local government for 10 years early in their career, and then they would come back into local government for maybe 3 years, and the 13 years were based on that final salary. Now, perhaps that's fair, perhaps it's not, it's your own views, but that's changed, and I don't know if that hurts. So there's a relevant issue there around that, actually. They are separate calculations for the purposes of the pension now, and I think that's perhaps one of the complications of when you reconcile these things. So you can't just merge them, because they're separate calculations, effectively. I don't know if that's relevant. That does create a complication.
Thank you. No further questions, members? Can we move to the recommendations then, please? Obviously, we've received a report at 2.1. So at 2.2, can we note that there were no issues have been identified in the course of the audit which have impacted on the fairness of the financial statements submitted for the audit? And at 2.3, can we note that the full council will receive the attached report and certified accounts at the meeting on the 28th of November? And at 2.4, note that updates on the action identified will be presented to future pension subcommittees. Okay. Councillor Wood?
Could we also have included in there the evidencing of what we were talking about earlier, about, you know, you said you were going to add into your reports a wee bit more detail?
I think that evidence, will that not be taking place in the next set of reports?
So it's actually in the report, the main report we'll talk about in a second, actually, but it's just the fact we weren't going to present it to you, but we'll talk through it if that's helpful, actually. And it will be absolutely, it's in our annual plan, which will come to you, generally comes to you in December time, and we've got a detail in there.
Okay, so members, we're happy with 2.1, 2.2, 2.3 and 2.4. Okay, thank you very much. We're just going to wait for Councillor Ferguson coming back in. It'll just be a minute. Okay, thank you, members. Mr. Reevy, are you taking us through this report?
We're going to do a tag team effort here, if that's okay. We're going to do it together.
Good. Well, please carry on.
If I could kick off, members, actually, and perhaps, as in previous years, emphasise to you what we base our audit on and where this report goes and the purpose of this report. Our audit and our contract effectively for this is driven from the Code of Audit Practice, which Audit Scotland produce, and which we had an input to as well, which covers, the financial statements, governance and areas like that, and you'll be familiar with that. In terms of the financial statements part, the Auditing Practices Board, we talked about, we follow international standards on auditing, and that's the international standards UK and Ireland. So that's the approach that we take. So the PwC approach is based on that plus, if that makes sense actually. So there's full compliance there. Just to touch on the point the member asked, we are subject to independent quality reviews, and that is not just internally within PwC. Perhaps I've told you, we have quarterly KPI by independent people within PwC. One of my jobs was reviewed last month, in fact. And we also have teams that sort of come flying in from elsewhere, from other offices, who do independent reviews. And we also get reviewed by outside bodies as well on our quality and reported on as well. So it's quite a stringent regime that sits around that as well. The report that we've got before you is, of course, a summarisation of the work that we've done throughout the year. It's addressed to you as members, not to your officers, to you as members. And it's also addressed to the Controller of Audit. That's quite an important distinction. And ultimately what will happen with this report, it will find its way onto the Audit Scotland public area of their website actually as well at some stage. So it's a public document in that regard, which is quite relevant. Moving perhaps over, as I move over to the financial statements and audit opinion, which is section 1, page 3 of our report. Just as I go into that, the other thing that's worth emphasising is that the approach we take is a risk-based approach. So we focus our attention on those areas that we believe give the greatest risk to a material misstatement in your financial statements. So that's areas that we put most of our effort into actually. The good news is that the audit opinion, like the pension opinion, is unqualified. So you should take some comfort from that. Be assured, if there was anything that I felt needed to be qualified, then I'm going to qualify it, not just inform you, but from a quality standard, I'm going to do that anyway. There is nothing. So it's an unqualified opinion. Now, Tony's maybe going to just talk you a little more through that section, if that's okay. And again, happy questions at the end or during it, whichever you prefer.
The section on page 3 around the audit approach is a good example of how our assessment of the risks in the audit has changed throughout the year. So on the 8th of January we presented our annual plan, and in that we gave an indication of the audit risks that we were expecting to place greater amount of testing over. However, through scrutiny from other people within PwC and through comparison across local authorities, we then compare to see, are there any significant risks or risks that people have focused on elsewhere that we've maybe not picked up on, or is there something that we've picked up on that other people haven't? And then we have a forum across all of our local authority audits to discuss what we feel would be the right balance specific to Dumfries and Galloway Council. So as a result of that, there has been changes to what we deemed as higher audit risks in the year. So the first one at 1.02 was around the risk of material misstatement and fraud in revenue recognition. Now that is in no way specific to Dumfries and Galloway Council or to public sector in general. It is part of the international standards on auditing that this is a presumed risk in all audits. So that has come in, but as I say, not as a result of anything that flagged to us that something was specific to this local authority. And then the second point at 1.03, we did have the liability concern on equal pay as an elevated risk in the prior year. However, through scrutiny and through the level of work that we could already see that officers had performed around this, we decided that we didn't need to give any greater level of scrutiny over this than we had last year. At 1.04, we'd just like to point out that the officers provided us with the working papers to a high standard with the agreed timetable, and in advance we provided samples and a list of deliverables which were provided to us on time, which is a marked improvement on last year. So we'd like to thank officers for their help in this year. At 1.06, we're just highlighting there that we've got, as Cameron had mentioned, we do work to materiality, and the figure that we've got there of 270,000 is saying that if any adjustment, if we came up with an amount over that then we would ask management to change it. And if there was a case that they refused to change it, then it would be reported in this report. And as we've said here, there have been no unadjusted misstatements. So anything that we did identify has already been adjusted in the final set of accounts.
What Tony's referring to there is matters that come to our attention and adjusted, we would report to you. It's not our materiality level. Our materiality level, Tony, is several £1 million. But that's if we find things that aren't adjusted, we'll report them to you at 270.
Yeah. Moving on to page 12 of the pack, at 1.08, we were just highlighting there that in the previous year, as you will know, we reported to you that we received an objection to the accounts from the Lordburn Community Council around the common good assets. We haven't received a further objection this year, and it's our opinion that the amounts are not material to us in our financial statements and in our review of the true and fairness of the accounts. However, as you'll see there, Action 1, we have an appendix at the back where anything that has come up through our audit, we've agreed an action plan with officers to basically come to a conclusion where we can look at this again next year and see if any improvement has been made. So management have agreed that in conjunction with the Lordburn Community Council, there will be a targeted approach to this with we've got a deadline of August 2014 to come back to us with this. So hopefully the same point won't be appearing in next year's report. Moving on to 1.09, this is the areas that we have flagged as significant and elevated risks, which really means areas where we would provide greater scrutiny than something that was classed as a normal risk. So as I've already picked up on, the first one is risk of fraud and revenue recognition. So the way that we were able to get comfort over that, one area that you'd be able to, I suppose, put through fraud and revenue would be through manual journals. So we use data analysis techniques and we use our data specialists in our team to pull through the manual journals and look for anything unusual, anything. And they've got lots of targeted factors that would be, I suppose, a characteristic of when somebody was likely to commit a fraud. For example, if you're posting journals through the night or at the weekend, and that's not something that you would normally see throughout the year. If there's a material amount going through, they look for things that are going through with an unusual title. For example, if it's called like error correction, they'll maybe pick that up just if somebody would try to put something through that would go undetected. So there are lots of different data techniques and different characteristics that our analysis team use to try and pick up things that might look like they're unusual. They then provide us with a list of all these, and then we test 100% of those to see whether they actually resulted in a genuine revenue transaction. Another thing we do is, as you would expect, pick a sample of revenue and agree it back to invoices and to bank, make sure it was at the correct value and in the correct period. And we're happy to say that we didn't identify any errors in that testing. The second significant risk we've got is a risk of fraud in expenditure recognition. And while we've said that the risk of fraud in revenue recognition is a presumed audit risk in every financial statement, we also, for public sector, then invert that to the risk of fraud in expenditure recognition, recognising that a lot of revenue can come through government grants, etc. So it might be that expenditure recognition would be the area where people might be able to hit budget by playing around with those numbers, because revenue are more easy to agree to government grants, etc. So the same kind of testing, like I've said, we use our data analysis techniques to test the journals in relation to expenditure, and we pick samples to agree them to invoice and to bank. And every year we perform unpredictability testing, which is basically testing that we didn't perform in the year before, just so I suppose that there isn't an expectation that we'll test the exact same things every year. So this year we picked members' expenses claimed in the year. And you'll be happy to know we didn't find any exceptions in that. The one thing that I've just seen you wiping your brow.
You should have paused.
One thing that we would want to highlight there in relation to Action 2 is when we presented our audit plan in January, we'd said that we were going to rely on the controls around accounts payable and expenditure. However, through initial testing, we came up with exceptions with the help of Kevin in internal audit. So we decided at that stage that we wouldn't rely on controls, and accounts payable would be subject to a more wider internal audit review. So Paul has recognised this, and there's an action plan drawn up with management and with Kevin to look at accounts payable controls in more detail. What I would like to stress is relying on controls is one method that we can do that would mean it would reduce the number of invoices that we would need to agree to bank and to ultimately to invoices themselves. So the fact that we didn't rely on controls doesn't mean that we weren't able to place comfort over the numbers themselves, because we just needed to extend our sample by tracing to bank and to invoice. So just wanted to flag that the fact that we didn't rely on controls doesn't mean that we're not happy with the numbers in the accounts. We are, but just because we came up with those control points, we need to report them to you. And I suppose just to flag that there is an action plan in place around that. The third one, management override of controls. Again, that's embedded in the two that we've spoke about above and is a presumed risk in all audits. So that's where we use our manual journals, unpredictability testing, and just to see if it covers more than just revenue and expenditure. This will cover every manual journal that is posted in the year and will flag any unusual items that we would then test to agree back to support. The action there is just a minor one, that there wasn't a report available that gave you an automatic name stamp showing who posted each journal. We were able to go in to, once a journal, we picked a journal, we could go in and see who had posted it, but that was just a report around Integra. So management have agreed that they'll look into that next year. So if we can get a report that automatically shows who posted each journal, it would just make our data interrogation techniques a little bit smarter. And then the fourth one there is an elevated risk that was in this year, just around the introduction of the new financial management system. And just to highlight that we performed extra testing around the migration of the data from the old system to the new system and found no exceptions in that area.
Thank you. Before we move on, I'm just going to see, members, are there any questions surrounding the information that you've received so far? Councillor Dryborough?
Thanks, Chair. It's a very valid point, 03, about the equal pay from elevated to normal. Obviously, there's been a court session, and it's going to go back to ET, and that could actually come back if the council, or the ET should I say, decide that there's still not a case to answer, and it would be difficult for an ET to do that in the Court of Sessions than that particular thing, so it may actually still be a risk later on with the cost of equal pay. So I'm just wondering how that's being dealt with at the moment.
Mr Haswell, are you going to take that question?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I think Councillor Driver is referring to the North case. We are currently in legal discussions with the trade unions regarding how we're going to implement the findings of the Supreme Court. I think going back to employment tribunals could take a long time, and the way that goes wrong, we will be bringing a report back to Policy and Resources Committee in very short order. I think what the auditor is saying is, despite the fact we've lost the case, we have the controls in place to make the payments. We also have the reserves there to make the payments. We've done a comparator, and there's enough money in your reserves to make any payments that might require to do. But this will come back to the owners, I would think, within the next month to 6 weeks. So just trying to find out what the trade union view on the matter is.
Do you want to come back?
Please, I'm pleased to hear the discussion going on with the trade union. Hope it gets sorted dead quick. Just on 1.08, with regards to the Lordburn Community Council, I know there's a lot of discussions going on with regard common good assets. Now, if the assets end up more than the 2.5% that you're saying in the previous page, then what sort of process have we got to go through if there is an asset that's, you know, that will show a discrepancy, if you like?
Do you want to take that question, Mr. Raby?
I'll take that. What we're looking at here is actually, when we look at your financial statements, we look at them as a whole. So if there was things that were patently or the totally wrong place or whatever it was, then that would be an issue. But if I recall, when we looked at this last year, this was about the way in which assets were being used. It wasn't so much about the assets weren't there or weren't being recognised. So from my point of view for the financial statements, and I have to emphasise that was what they objected to, the financial statements, not a more general complaint as such. And so from a financial statements perspective, it was fine from my point of view. But there is an issue here actually to obviously satisfy or not the Community Council clearly on the use of the assets.
Mr. Haswell, do you want to add anything further?
Yeah, I think just to reiterate what Mr. Rugas said, clearly the difference of view between the council and the Community Council, this one in particular, although Community Councils in general in former boroughs is, historically, councils have used what may have been common good land, for example, office accommodation and things like that. There is a historic issue here. We are working forward with Lord Borough Community Council. It's been a resource issue for me, in that if I take an hour off doing the day-to-day transactional work to check title deeds and old records, it's more or less for the council to use on transactional work. So we've been doing it as and when possible, or when, for example, a piece of ground comes up for sale, first thing we do is we check, was it common good ground? Could it be construed to be common good ground? So that's been the general way of approaching it. Clearly that doesn't satisfy the Community Council, so I'm looking at ways of bringing in additional resource to do that. We're also in dialogue with the Community Council regarding what is and isn't common good, because there's a divergence of view there. But that's something that I think we've given an undertaking to the auditors that we'll deal with that.
Councillor Ferguson, is it on the same subject? Okay.
Thanks, Chair. Just to build on that, I'm picking up from what you're saying there, Alec, that we need work done in all the common good across the region, not just the Dumfries Borough one. And I think in terms of equity, that has to be made very clear to everyone. They're not the only players in town, and there are others in the same boat. And I think as an audit committee, we should expect that all common good are treated equally here. And the resources are spread across, not centred on one just because they jump up and down and shout the most.
I'm presuming that is the case, Mr. Hassel?
That is the case. We inherited from district councils records of common good, and the district councils inherited those from the town councils or the borough councils. And I'll quote a former museum curator. I won't try his Yorkshire accent, but he used to say that the habits of some former town clerks were less than acceptable. The records were bad when we inherited them. I've got to be honest with you.
Thank you. Is it on the same subject? Okay.
Just on the last statement, was it so bad that we didn't establish, I know we went to vote in 1996 on this very issue, but were they so bad that we didn't know what was owned by the common good in Stranraer, the old town council to Wigtown District Council? I refer to the Inner Harbour on this one, and whether indeed, as Andy says, I don't think it's a matter of who's jumping the loudest, it's what is the issue at the time of common good in terms of how you treat it. There is, it's held, it's commonly held, or commonly known that there are common good land in land bank, etc. So, I just wonder if we'd ever return to that one in terms of the Inner Harbour in Stranraer.
Yes, as we go through it, all the records will be checked. However, I have a councillor's opinion, as Councillor Scobie is well aware, which diverges with my own view, however.
Thank you. Can I just quickly go back to equal pay? I mean, Councillor Driver asked some questions on equal pay, and Mr Haswell answered. Can we just have an assurance from the auditors, please, that the information that you've put in front of us today has actually taken into consideration the North case and the fact that the Council has the correct funding set aside and will be implementing accordingly?
I draw members' attention to paragraphs 225 through 228 on page 10 and 11 of our report, which is where we mention equal pay. This matter is far from resolved, hence why we have two things here. We have a provision, which is, in accounting terms, there's a number of things that need to be in place to actually put money aside. And one of the three important issues to put provision aside is you need to have a fairly accurate way of calculating what you should be putting aside. So you can't just say, we think it's about £1 million, let's put it aside. It has to be based on a fair bit of detail and evidence. So for that 7.6 million, you can do that. However, you've also got in your financial statements a contingent liability, like most other councils. And that contingent liability is recognising it is likely that you are going to have a liability somewhere of more than the 7.6 million. The difficulty is, you do not have and are unable to give us the information that enables a reasonably accurate calculation to be done. So that is the problem, hence it's contingent upon certain other circumstances. For all councils, I think, this is a worrying area, and it's an area that your officers are very focused on, it's an area that you as members are briefed on, and that needs to continue. When this will be resolved, who knows, it's contingent. And that's the difficulty we face here, but at some stage down the line, you're going to have to pay more than 7.6 million. I think that is probable. That's why it's in there.
Thank you for that. Councillor Ferguson.
Thanks, Chair. Just coming back to Carmen to the equal pay claims. Whilst I appreciate the majority 251 are that very well known issue, the other 107, what's the liability for them?
Can you...
Do you want me to pick this one up?
Yes, please.
So I suppose it might be good just to give you an indication of the process that officers go through to get to the provision in the first place. So what happens is when somebody puts in a claim, first of all, with the help of HR, with the help of the legal office and with officers, a decision will be made as to whether, I suppose, the correct, just simple things like the person actually did work here, they worked in the position that they said they were going to, etc. And then a calculation will be made based on, from what they've said, if they were successful, how much would we have to pay out? And a worst case scenario is then calculated. And what I would say is the provision that's in place has been based on this worst case scenario. So assuming that everybody who's put in a claim and who has put in, we'll say valid, but not within legal terms, because obviously that's still to be decided, but valid in terms of they did work for the council, they were in the position in the right time frame that they said they were, then if they were all successful, then that would result in a payout of around 7.9 million. However, what the contingent liability is the people who haven't come forward, so the unknowns, which you can't put a value on. So while the 107 don't specifically relate to the case that went through early this year, they have been calculated on the same basis as the 251, based on the length of time and the comparator and the difference between that.
Thank you.
Can I come back?
Yes.
Yeah, that's exactly the question I'm asking, though, because you could have 20 that amount to actually almost as much as 150 in terms of monetary situation. It really depends on what the level of the claim is and what the pay grades of the staff concerned are. And I think we need some further information and some look at that, because that has to be in the risk register somewhere.
Mr. Reevy? Paul?
As Alex said, we'll bring forward a further report on this to the Policy and Resources Committee, I think, at the next meeting. There is a lot of work to be done in terms of clarifying our current equal pay liability. But I should say the £7.985 million provision is based on the full 358, and it is based on that very detailed calculation based on individuals, what comparators they're using, and what the potential amount is. And as Tony said, we have taken a prudent approach to creating that provision. We've done it based on effectively a worst case scenario, but we'll come back to you with further details of the actual amounts. But I could just give you that kind of assurance that we have looked at each individual on an individual basis and done the calculation for that and reflected the full amount in that £7.9 million provision.
Okay, then, thanks, Paul. So can you give us a ballpark figure between the 251, what that's roughly worth, and what the 107 is worth? Is that impossible, or can that be included in the report you bring forward?
We can. I've not got the information with us this morning, but we can do that. We've done it based on individuals, so we'll be able to do that split and make sure that's reflected in that report's coming forward.
I think I'd provide members with a reassurance that your officers have made a very prudent judgment on this, and I would hope that the auditors would confirm that. We, unlike a number of local authorities in Scotland, we have made provision for this. And we've made provision on the basis of a calculation and a known number. What we don't know is what might come out of the woodwork in the future.
Okay, members, we're now going to move on. So who's taking us to the next part?
I'll take you there if I may, actually. I won't go through this section in quite as much detail. That's the use of resources, section 2, running from page 6. Things perhaps just to highlight on page 7, we recognise the challenge that you continue to have, that you need to, it's just the norm now, isn't it? You've got to identify savings. It's been the norm for a long time for you. It's going to be the norm for going forward, looking forward. You did actually, in terms of the number that you set yourself in the year, you did save around £700,000 more than you had as your original target. And the majority of savings, as has been the past, and as I would probably anticipate going forward, is coming from staffing reductions and procurement efficiencies, i.e. when you're buying things externally. So I would, whilst you don't have for going out 2-3 years the detail of every single thing you're going to be doing, I would anticipate these are the likely areas where you'll be looking at again going forward. I also touch on in page 8 on your general fund balance, and what I'm trying to give a feel for there is that it doesn't seem excessive, because a lot of what makes up that fund balance is already committed. It's for very specific purposes. There is an element that's not, but the majority is for specific purposes. And the new one was, of course, the creation of your social work support fund of £1 million that you agreed to put by specifically for that purpose. And one of the things there, and when we had discussions with management, was around that, and that is the intention, that it is used to enable change, not simply to shore something up. If that's the right phraseology I'm using. So it shouldn't be just a short-term gap filler. It should only be used, and I think the management have got put an arrangement in place to ensure when that's being used, it's going to be something that's going to have sustainable change and make it happen, actually. So that's quite an important one because of the issues we've had and continue to have around certain elements of social work. The other thing, perhaps on page 9, 2.16, we just acknowledge the fact that you, looking forward as far as you can, 3 years ahead, are anticipating that you are going to have savings of around, in 13, 14, 7.2 million, rising to 9.9 million and 9.2 million in 2015-16. That's your anticipation just now around that. And perhaps the last thing I would draw to your attention, I won't raise the equal pay again, if that's okay, because we've got that there and we had a good discussion. But it is the welfare reform, and we are, as much as we can be as auditors, we're being complimentary here. We do see that you're taking specific action here. You've got specific focus, and that's worth knowing when you look at the type of action that we put at the back. Whenever an auditor uses the word continue, then what we're saying is we're acknowledging that you are doing something there, but we're saying continue to do that, take specific action around this. This is a significant area that has still got a bit to go to see the full impacts that are coming through. Some already are being seen very clearly, I'm sure, across your various areas, across your wards, but it's something actually is going to continue.
Thank you.
Shall I pause at that one, that section? Shall I pause at that section, Chair?
Do you mind pausing? I think there's a couple of questions. Councillor Witts, do you wish to ask something?
Thank you, Chair. I'm referring back to the executive summary on the first page, that's page 9, it's the paragraph, the section on use of resources, and the figures compare the general fund balance of 63.752 million vis-a-vis the next paragraph where it says usable reserves of 72.067 million. That's a difference of 8.3 million. That's, I was wondering what that represents.
The second figure shown there actually includes funds that are out with general fund balances, including the capital fund and the repair and renewal reserve, both of which are reported to Policy and Resources Committee at the same time as year-end general fund balances to give members that overall picture. So it's the inclusion of those separate additional funds, capital fund, repair and renewal fund. I think the insurance funds may be in there as well. Yeah, the insurance fund as well. All those amounts are specifically detailed in the Council's accounts, but also they've been reported to Policy and Resources Committee.
Councillor Ferguson?
Yeah, I refer to page 26, 1.09. It's the general processing report. I see the implementation date for that's only a few weeks away. Are we going to meet that target? Or?
Yes, that's the expectation. It's a fairly simple thing. It's not a fundamental problem with the system. It's just the reports from the system are not picking up the journal process. So it's just something we need to finalise with Capita, and we'll have that report available.
Okay, thank you, members. Can we move on to the governance section, please? Thank you.
I'll take you through this briefly. There's not really a lot coming out of this that we haven't mentioned already. On page 13, 3.11 and 3.12, we'll just give a little bit more detail about the accounts payable control recommendations that had already been identified and as mentioned earlier. And then at 3.13, we discussed the follow-up of outstanding recommendations. So good progress has been made in that 7 out of 9 recommendations that we had outstanding have now been implemented. And the 2 that are still outstanding are in relation to the social work services and just around the management of the business and financial management arrangements within there, ensuring that the action plan is followed up on and that continued scrutiny is given to that area. And then the second one was just around the objection from the Lord Brown Community Council, which we've already picked up on.
And the only other issue we would like to just conclude in terms of presenting the report, though happy to take questions, anybody else, is to offer our thanks to Kevin, who I see has had to pop out for a second, so he's missing his glory here actually. but Kevin and his team have been very flexible and very helpful to our audit this year actually, so we want to just record our formal thanks to them and that team, if that's okay.
Thank you. And can you give us an assurance that the information that you've received from internal auditors is what you would expect to see?
The answer is yes to that actually. I'd say very open, very helpful, very flexible. There's been no issues at all. It's a very effective working relationship, and just re-emphasising the point that Tony made at the beginning with Paul, Fiona and the rest of the finance team. We all had hiccups last year, as we know, from all sides actually, but these have been well resolved actually, and I believe a very effective working relationship with your team.
Thank you for that. Members? Councillor Dryburgh?
It's just coming back to 3.14 about the management of social work services. Now obviously it's a demand-driven service at the end of the day, and we are seeing some increase in service requirements excuse me, after the welfare reform that actually goes on in bedroom tax and universal credits and all that sort of stuff. So I mean, are you content that what we're actually doing within council is sufficient at the moment? And is there any I think of the word now, senior moment. any other audits within other councils where you have they got the same sort of problem?
Yes, they do have the same problem actually. It depends, there's probably 1 or 2 exceptions depending on the areas of deprivation that councils have got, as you can appreciate, across Scotland. The one area I would say looking forward for me to make sure nothing falls between the cracks, if that's the right phrase, is there's quite a big structural change coming, as you know, around social around social work in the health sector. And invariably, we've all been through lots of change. I've seen lots of change over decades in the public sector. And you've got to be very careful. The quality of care for those that are most vulnerable continues, and that standard doesn't drop because of that. And that can be a challenge because people get very focused on the internal merging of things and what's happening. So I would say, going forward, that's the area I would be looking at I would see as a risk area going forward to ensure that the level of care and attention to those vulnerable continues.
Thank you for that. I mean, I know that is on the social work risk register, but it may be worthwhile just checking to see whether it is on the corporate risk register as well, because it's maybe something, if it isn't there, it's maybe something that we should be considering adding to that.
Happy to look at that, Chairman.
Members, will move on to performance, or section 4.
There's no particular areas we want to raise with you in terms of performance. Actually, we got the information around the statutory performance indicators, etc. The follow-up, which was carried out around the National Performance Audit, Successful Audit Scotland, was all fine. We could see that you had acknowledged these. You were taking action where relevant in these. So the performance section is quite short in that regard. It's quite focused what we look at, but in terms of what we've looked at, then there was nothing particular that we'd want to raise with members today.
No questions, members? No? Okay. And have we got any questions on the action plan? Can I just ask, on page 26, 1.09, we talk about, obviously, accounts payable controls, and we have mentioned that throughout the morning. What additional controls are you considering should be put in place, and how effective do you think those will be?
Well, if I draw your attention to 3.11, we've highlighted there that it's not necessarily that the controls aren't in place, it was just through the sample that we did, they weren't being implemented as they should be. So the main one that we raised was around amendments to supplier data. So as you'll know, one way of frauds coming into the local authority is people who are fictitious suppliers sending in saying, I'd like to change my bank details, and it would be somebody's personal bank details. And then ultimately, when you then go to pay that business, it goes to somebody's personal bank account rather than the person it should go to. So one of the high controls that we like to see there is when a change to bank details comes through, that proper checks are done to make sure that that supplier is genuine. For example, having on the system that there's only, I suppose, one person or a couple of people in the business that you would then call to say, we've received this letter, is it from you? Yeah, that's fine. Just even that call to check that it has come from within the company. So when we sampled the changes to supplier data around that, the controls around being able to evidence that, for example, that phone call had taken place weren't there. So it's not to say that controls hadn't happened, it's just there was no audit trail for us to verify that it had. So it's just strengthening up the understanding around things like that. And then at 3.12 would say that we raised 3 medium risk findings. One was around segregation of duties in the order process. So again, picking a sample, Kevin and his team saw that there were people who raised an order and then approved the invoice when it came in. So that's just simple, having somebody else there to approve or segregate the duties if there is enough staff allowed to do so. The next one was around authorisation of payments and incomplete audit trails in relation to the BACS payments. So again, it's all about like the admin and the audit trail and being able to evidence to us that appropriate authorisation has happened and been able to provide it to Kevin and his team. So, as we've said, management have recognised this and the action plan has been put in place, and internal audit are planning to do a wider control around accounts payable. Because what we will say is, through liaison with Kevin and his team, we directed him on the controls that we specifically would rely on for our external audit purposes. So what Kevin has agreed to do is just do a wider accounts payable review covering all the types of controls that he would expect to see in place rather than just the 5 or 6 that we rely on for our audit.
quite frustrating for senior management as well, because we with the view that the things that we've just talked about there, that you have put a control in place. So when, for example, the one with the supplier changes, when there was all, a few years ago, you remember there was 1 or 2 frauds, you did put an intended control in place. What we've got here is people not following what you say. So that's the issue. Now, if everything's fine, but let's just say that what happens is that there's then a fraudulent payment of £100,000 to an organisation, and it happens to be one of these where there's no evidence of the phone call being made, then it becomes somewhat quite difficult, doesn't it then? So they're not really theoretical. These are just people not doing their job, quite candidly.
Thank you. I'm presuming that we are addressing that position. Can I just have an assurance on that, Mr. Hazel? Yes. Okay, can I ask, sorry, just one more, page 20, 3.07, in the last sentence, why are we using in bold black type the words do not disagree rather than agree? Can you explain that to me, please? Thank you.
Of course I can. And we do not do any specific work for the purposes of this statement. That is the agreement that we have with through our contract. Therefore, what we're doing is we're basing it purely on work we've seen elsewhere. So we're saying from work that we've done elsewhere on your financial statements and elsewhere, we don't disagree. Nothing has come to our attention that would mean that we would disagree with the statement we've made. So that's why I'm unable to make a positive statement, because if I had to make a positive statement, I would have to do a lot of specific work around this statement to actually allow me to do that. And that's what it means. So you cannot take as much much comfort from a do not disagree as you can from an agree. That's perhaps worth saying.
Thank you. Any other members? No? Can we move? Can we move to the recommendations then, please? 2.1 members, we've received the report. 2.2, note that no issues have been identified. I'm not going to read these out because I think you can all manage to read for yourselves. 2.3, note the full council received the attached report. And 2.4, note that the updates of actions identified will be presented to a future Audit and Risk Committee. Can I maybe suggest that we add a 2.5? I know that Kevin's missed his minute of glory, but he has actually come back into the chamber, and I just wondered whether members were minded to add a 2.5 in here, just to obviously to reiterate the external auditors' comments when they thanked the internal auditors and the staff for all their assistance. I just think that this report has been particularly good, and I do think that we should recognise our own staff members. Councillor Ferguson?
You want to move it and note to the input or whatever it is of internal audit?
To yourself, Chairman, the former words I had for the committee were to note the appreciation of the external auditors for the assistance received from the Council's internal audit staff team.
Right,
Could you make it section 95, officer, and internal audit staff team?
Of course we can.
Indeed we can.
Thank you very much.
We don't want to leave you out, Paul, that's for sure. Without you, we would all be lost. Anyway, thank you very much to the external auditors and their team, and to Paul and to members. Thanks very much. I have no further business.